My name is Sergeant Major Ronan Briggs, 38 years old, and for the better part of 2 decades I've lived and breathed the Army. I've trained Special Forces soldiers, broken recruits who thought they could coast, and built men into warriors. I believed in discipline, loyalty, and honor, not just in the field but in my personal life too. You spend long enough in this line of work and you start to see the cracks in people before they even know they're there. A man's integrity shows in how he laces his boots, how he treats the last man across the finish line, and whether he can be trusted when the bullets start flying. I never imagined the cracks I'd one day find would be in my own family, and the woman I loved. But that's getting ahead of myself. That morning, the sun was punishing over the Carolina training grounds. Midday heat shimmered off the blacktop, and the air was thick enough to choke on. Perfect conditions to see who had grit and who would break. Delta Company stood in formation in front of me, boots scuffed, faces already slick with sweat from the ruck march I'd had them run before the obstacle course. Most were new, eyes still too bright, uniforms still too neat. I let the silence sit just long enough for the weaker ones to shift uncomfortably. Then I said, "Gentlemen, this is the part of the day where you find out what you're made of. And for some of you that's going to be a hard truth." Private Jackson, barely out of high school, swayed on his feet. My gaze locked on him instantly. Jackson. Front and center. He stumbled forward. "Think you're gonna survive Special Forces selection if you can't survive me?" "And no, Sergeant Major," he stammered. I stepped closer until my shadow fell over him. "Prove it." "Drop 50 push-ups." "Count 'em." He hit the dirt, counting loud, voice breaking. I crouched beside him, voice low so only he could hear. "The day you stop trying, Jackson, is the day you've decided someone else isn't worth coming home. Don't ever forget that." He finished, arms shaking, and I sent him back into formation. The rest of the company got the message. When I blew the whistle, they hit the course. Rope climbs, wall runs, weighted crawls under barbed wire. No excuses. No mercy. I moved among them like a shadow, barking orders when they hesitated, pushing them harder when they looked like they had nothing left. I didn't need to scream. A quiet order from me could light more fire under them than any drill sergeant's rage. An hour later, the last man dropped off the final wall. They stood there, bent over, gasping like they just crawled out of hell. "You made it today," I told them. "Tomorrow you'll wish you hadn't. But keep showing up and one day you'll thank me." They filed out, limping toward the barracks, probably muttering about how much they hated me. But I know how it works. Hate turns into respect and respect into loyalty. I built my career on it. That's why betrayal hits me different than it does most men. For me, loyalty isn't a word, it's a contract. When you break it, you're not just out of my life. You're the enemy. And Elise Warren, the woman I was weeks away from marrying, had no idea she'd just become my next target. When you spend your life surrounded by military discipline, you start to believe you can read people. You think you can spot the liars, the manipulators, the opportunists before they ever get close enough to hurt you. I thought I was damn good at it, until I met Captain Elise Warren. I first saw her 3 years ago during a joint logistics exercise at Fort Bragg. She was the new golden girl in 3rd Special Forces Group, sharp uniform, sharper wit, and the kind of confidence that made junior officers stumble over their words. She was in her late 20s, with chestnut hair tucked perfectly into a regulation bun and eyes that stayed locked on yours long enough to make you wonder what she was thinking. We met over a heated debate about convoy timings. She thought her supply routes could shave 20 minutes off my planned schedule. I thought she was wrong. Turned out she wasn't, and I respected that. That's how she got in the door, not with a smile but with competence. From there things moved quickly. She was at my PT sessions, at my table in the DFAC, then meeting me off-post for beers. She had this way of leaning in when she talked, like nothing else in the room mattered. That kind of focus is addictive to a man who's used to being treated like just another rank on a collar. To everyone on base, we were the picture of a power couple. I was the seasoned Special Forces instructor with a reputation for forging steel out of raw recruits. She was the up-and-coming logistics officer with ambition in her stride. People liked us. Command noticed us. And I started to think maybe she was the one woman who understood my world. But Elise came with her own history, one I didn't look at closely enough at the time. Her father had been a career Army officer, the kind of man who collected medals and divorces in equal measure. Cold, distant, and more concerned with the next promotion than with raising a daughter. Her mother had walked out when Elise was 15, leaving her to grow up under the roof of a man who barely spoke to her unless it was to criticize. It wasn't until later that I realized what that did to her. Elise didn't just want a partner, she wanted approval from men she saw as powerful, respected, untouchable. In her mind, that kind of validation wasn't love, it was proof of her own worth. And if she could take it from someone who already had the loyalty of others, even better. She used to ask me about my father, Colonel Victor Briggs, more than she asked about my deployments. What's he like in command? She'd press. What kind of leader is he? I thought it was simple curiosity. After all, my father was a decorated officer with decades of service. Why wouldn't she be interested? We got engaged a year ago on the parade field after a change of command ceremony. She said yes with tears in her eyes, kissed me in front of half the brigade, and by the end of the week, our engagement photos were on the unit's Facebook page. The congratulations poured in. We became that couple, the one junior soldiers pointed to and said, "That's what I want one day." Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the little things. The way her compliments could turn into comparisons. The way she lingered just a little too long when my father was in the room. The way her hand would rest on his forearm during conversation as if she didn't notice. Then there was my cousin, Lieutenant Mason Hartley, from my mother's side. Good kid, clean-cut, straight arrow, the kind of officer who still believed every word in the Army values creed. He'd just come back from a peacekeeping deployment overseas when Elise invited him to grab coffee and talk about career advice. Mason told me later, after everything went down, that she'd leaned across the table, touched his hand, and asked if he'd ever dated someone older. He shut it down immediately, told her it was inappropriate, and left. But at the time he didn't tell me. He thought I was happy and he didn't want to cause trouble. That's the thing about manipulation, it's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It plants seeds and waits for you to water them with your own trust. The wedding was set for the base chapel, a full military ceremony. Honor guard, saber arch, the works. The reception would be at the officers' club, with the guest list stacked with commanders, old friends, and my family. I thought it would be the day I sealed the best decision of my life. Elise threw herself into the planning. Dress fittings between PT sessions, cake tastings after staff meetings, color coordinating the table settings to match our dress blues. She was in her element. Every detail was perfect, every smile flawless. And I was blind enough to believe it. If you'd asked me then, I would have told you I'd found the one person who matched my pace and shared my values. I would have told you that the wedding was just the first mission of the rest of our lives. I had no idea that for Elise Warren, it wasn't about building a life with me. It was about collecting trophies. And she had her eyes on the biggest one in the room, my father. If you ask a soldier who their role model is, you'll get all kinds of answers. War heroes, legendary generals, maybe a drill instructor who pushed them past their limits. For me, it had always been my father, Colonel Victor Briggs. I grew up watching the man wear the uniform like it was part of his skin. 35 years in service, a rack of ribbons that told stories he'd never speak out loud, and the kind of presence that made a room go quiet when he walked in. He was the example I followed into the Army, the voice in my head when I thought about leadership and responsibility. We weren't the toss a ball around in the yard kind of father and son. He didn't teach me how to fish or take me camping. What he gave me was discipline, structure, and an unshakable standard. When I was 13, he made me run 3 miles every morning before school. When I was 16, he taught me how to stand my ground when people tried to push me around. When I was 18, he pinned my first set of Army stripes on my chest. Even in adulthood, I measured my decisions by one question. Would my father respect this? When I introduced him to Elise, I saw that flicker of approval in his eyes. It was the same look he'd given me when I got my first command posting. She knew how to charm him. Sharp salutes, respectful tone, and just enough humor to make him laugh without crossing any lines. Or so I thought. In the months after our engagement, Dad started showing up more often. He claimed it was to help with wedding planning, but my father had never cared about flowers or seating charts in his life. Still, I didn't think twice about it. In my mind, it was just family bonding, something I hadn't gotten much of growing up. He and Elise would talk while I was busy on the range or running drills. I'd come home to find them at the kitchen counter, sharing a drink, going over guest lists. I figured it was harmless. My old man could be stiff in social settings, so I was glad to see him warming up. There were moments I should have paid attention to. One night, we were at the officers' club for a formal dinner. Elise wore a black dress that hugged her figure just enough to turn heads. My father complimented her in front of the table. "You look sharp, Captain Warren," but it was the way his eyes lingered for a fraction of a second too long that stuck in my mind. I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining it. Another time, I caught them laughing in the kitchen over some inside joke I wasn't in on. "What's so funny?" I asked. Elise just shook her head and said, "Oh, nothing. while my father smirked like they were co-conspirators. It was small but it hit a nerve. Still, I told myself not to be paranoid. It didn't help that Elise had a way of leaning into conversations with older men. It was subtle, a touch on the arm when she laughed, holding eye contact just a little longer than necessary. She did it with my father more than anyone else. But he was my father. The man who taught me loyalty. The man I believed would take a bullet for me. If I'd been paying attention, I might have remembered her questions early on, asking what he was like in command, how he handled pressure, what soldiers thought of him. At the time, it felt like she was taking an interest in my family. Now I know she was scouting. The real kicker came a few weeks before the wedding when my mother, Margaret, mentioned how cute it was that Elise and my father had been going on coffee runs together. "Your dad says she's a great listener," she said with a smile, like it was the most wholesome thing in the world. I should have felt a twinge of suspicion. Instead, I told myself I was lucky that my fiancé and my father got along so well. That's the kind of trust one had in both of them. When you serve long enough, you learn that betrayal in the field is rare. But when it comes, it's devastating because it's always from someone inside the wire. Someone you'd never guard against. And that's exactly what was happening right under my nose. I didn't know it then, but Elise wasn't just marrying me. She was testing the waters with the man who raised me. And the colonel? For all his medals and talk of honor, he was taking the bait. By the time my wedding day rolled around, their little game had already crossed the line. I just didn't have the evidence yet. That would come soon enough, the night before the wedding, and when it did, I'd realize my father, my fiancé, and the foundation of my life were all rotten from the inside out. There's a saying in the army, you never forget the one who had your six when the bullets were flying. For me, that was Captain Arden Cole. We'd met 10 years ago on deployment in Afghanistan. I was still a staff sergeant back then, leading a small special forces team attached to an intel unit. Arden was the intel officer assigned to our AO, sharp mind, steady nerves, and the kind of situational awareness you couldn't teach. She had this calm under fire that made you trust her instantly, and in the field, trust is oxygen. What started as professional respect turned into something more when we both rotated back stateside. We weren't the kind of couple that needed candlelight dinners or weekend getaways. Our connection was built in chow halls and after-action reviews, and in the quiet moments when we both knew we'd made it through another day alive. But life in uniform doesn't care about your personal plans. She got a posting to Germany for a NATO assignment, and I was locked into an extended training cycle stateside. We told ourselves we'd make it work, but long distance in the army is like trying to hold water in your hands. Eventually, it slips through your fingers. We parted on good terms, no screaming, no betrayal. Just circumstance. Still, she was the one I measured every woman against. And nobody quite matched. I hadn't seen her in 6 years. That changed 2 weeks before my wedding to Elise. I was walking into the base coffee shop when I heard a voice behind me. "Briggs?" I turned and there she was, uniform crisp, hair shorter now but the same steady gaze. She was back stateside on reassignment, this time as the new intelligence chief for our group. We shook hands, but the moment our palms touched, it was like the last 6 years collapsed into a heartbeat. We caught up for 15 minutes talking like no time had passed. She congratulated me on the engagement, said Elise was beautiful, in that polite, guarded tone people use when they don't want to show their opinion too soon. I told her she should come to the wedding. She hesitated for half a second, then said she'd be there. It wasn't until after she walked away that I realized my chest felt lighter than it had in months. Around the same time, another thread was quietly weaving into the story, my cousin, Lieutenant Mason Hartley. Mason was from my mother's side, the son of her older sister. Clean-cut, straight arrow, and so by the book that his platoon joked he probably ironed his socks. He'd just come home from a peacekeeping deployment overseas, and like any proud family, we'd been swapping stories over beers. That's when he mentioned offhand that Elise had invited him out for coffee a couple of weeks earlier. He didn't go into detail then, just said it was a little weird, and quickly changed the subject. I didn't think much of it. Mason was polite to a fault. I figured she was just trying to make him feel welcome in the family. I wouldn't find out the real story until the day everything exploded. The week before the wedding, I was busy finalizing logistics with the chapel and officers' club, making sure the saber arch was squared away, seating charts were locked, and my unit's honor guard knew the drill. Elise was just as busy with her side of planning. Or so I thought. Looking back, the warning signs were there. She'd been disappearing for dress fittings that didn't match the schedule she'd given me. She'd started wearing a new perfume, something light but lingering, the kind of scent you remember when you catch it on a pillowcase. And she'd grown sharper with me, more easily irritated, though she covered it well in public. One evening, Arden stopped me in the corridor outside my office. She'd been reviewing security clearance renewals and mentioned, almost casually, that Elise's clearance had been flagged for an informal inquiry, after an anonymous tip suggested potential fraternization concerns. She didn't say more and I didn't press. I trusted Elise. Or maybe I just wanted to. At the time, I didn't realize how these threats, Arden's return, Mason's discomfort, and Elise's subtle changes, were leading to the same point. I thought my biggest challenge in the next 2 weeks would be making it through the ceremony without some high-ranking guest complaining about the menu. Instead, what was coming was the kind of betrayal I'd spent my career preparing soldiers to handle in combat. Except this wouldn't come from across a battlefield. It would come from inside my own walls, from the two people who should have been my strongest allies. And when it came, I'd learned something I'd always told my men but never had to live for myself. When you're betrayed from the inside, the only way to survive is to make the enemy regret ever crossing your line. The night before your wedding is supposed to be one of those once-in-a-lifetime memories, the calm before the big day, maybe a drink with family, some nervous anticipation. For me, it turned into the opening salvo of the most personal operation I'd ever run. Elise was across post in the female officers' quarters, getting ready with her bridesmaids. I was at the visiting officer quarters with my father, Colonel Victor Briggs. It was his idea we spend the night under the same roof, one last father-son moment before you tie the knot, he'd said. I'd taken it as a gesture of support. We'd ordered room service, steak for him, grilled chicken for me, and spread the seating chart out on the little desk in my suite. We were moving names around, making sure General Harper wasn't anywhere near Command Sergeant Major Dorsey. Those two had a history. My father was in a good mood, relaxed, almost warm. It felt normal. Around 2,230 hours, he excused himself to hit the latrine. He left his army-issued phone on the desk next to his coffee. I wasn't looking for trouble. But when you've spent years in special forces, you learn to scan your environment without thinking about it. My eyes flicked to the phone out of habit. That's when the screen lit up. A message preview. From Elise. I should have looked away. I didn't. Last night was unforgettable, Victor. I'll replay your hands on me for weeks. Our secret always. Attached was a photo. Blurry but clear enough. Elise in bed, bare shoulders, that damn perfume bottle on the nightstand. My father beside her, shirtless, smirking. The timestamp hit like a flashbang, 2,347 hours. The night before. My pulse didn't spike. My breathing didn't change. Years of training locked me down into the calm I used to get in the seconds before a firefight. I picked up my own phone, took a picture of his screen, then opened the thread and snapped everything, every message, every photo. All of it. When I checked the photo metadata, the location tag confirmed what my gut already knew. Visiting officer quarters. On base. The same night I'd been across post with my best man, running a final rehearsal with the honor guard. My father had been in bed with my fiancée. When he came back into the room, I had the photos stored in 3 secure locations. My phone, my encrypted cloud, and a portable drive in my go bag. I didn't even glance at him. Long day tomorrow, I said. He patted my shoulder. Get some rest, son. Tomorrow's the best day of your life. If I hadn't been stone cold inside, I might have laughed. I didn't sleep. Instead, I planned. You don't lead men through combat without learning how to dismantle an enemy without firing a shot. The people who'd hurt me weren't going to see rage, they were going to see precision. First, I thought about just confronting them, shutting the whole thing down in private. But that would be mercy, and mercy was something neither of them had earned. They'd chosen to humiliate me in the most intimate way possible. The only proportional response was to return the favor. By 0100 hours, I had the plan. The officers' club reception had a high-end AV system. The slideshow for Ronan and Elise, our journey, was already cued to run after the best man's toast. All I needed to do was swap the file. The replacement? A perfectly timed sequence. Their messages, their photos, their call logs. Each image watermarked with the date, time, and location. No denials. No wiggle room. To make it airtight, I called Captain Arden Cole. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. She didn't ask questions, just said, "Where do you need me?" She'd be at the reception, ready to control the AV booth so no one could cut the feed. I also looped in Mason Hartley. I told him I knew what Elise had tried with him. He looked like he'd swallowed a grenade pin, but then he nodded. If you need me to speak up, I will. By 0300, the mission was set. Ceremony would go on as planned. No hint of what was coming. Reveal would hit in front of every guest. Victor and Elise would be unable to escape the blast radius. I'd lead this like any op, controlled, clinical, decisive. At 0600 I shaved, pressed my dress blues until the creases could cut glass, and looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't the groom anymore. I was the executioner. Tomorrow wasn't going to be the best day of my life. It was going to be the day I burned their world down. When you've led missions in hostile territory, you learn one rule above all: control the battlefield. This battlefield wasn't going to be a desert or a city block. It was going to be the base chapel and the officers' club. By sunrise, my plan was in motion. The first thing I needed was access. The AV system at the officers' club wasn't something just anyone could tamper with. It ran through the base's secure intranet, an added layer to prevent exactly the kind of sabotage I was about to pull off. Luckily, I had someone who owed me a favor: Sergeant First Class Bennett, one of the IT guys in base communications. I found him in the comms room, sipping bad coffee over a stack of maintenance logs. "Bennett," I said, stepping inside. He looked up, instantly straightening. "Sergeant Major. What can I do for you?" "I need a little file swap in the officers' club system. Wedding slideshow. The current file's outdated." Bennett frowned. "That's not usually my lane." "It is today," I said, my tone just on the edge of suggestion and command. "I want to surprise my bride with something special. Discretion is part of the gift." He grinned like a man in on a romantic secret and didn't ask another question. 10 minutes later, I had credentials to load whatever I wanted into the system's presentation queue. The second step was protection. If anyone caught wind of what was coming, they could pull the plug. That's where Arden came in. I caught her between intel briefings and laid out the essentials. "I'm going to expose them. I need the AV booth locked down during the reception." Her eyes narrowed, the kind of narrow that meant she already suspected who them was. "You're really doing this in front of everyone?" "Yes." She studied me for a beat, then nodded once. "Then no one will touch that system without my say-so." Next I called Mason. He'd been quiet since I confronted him about Elise's attempted seduction. I found him in the motor pool helping a mechanic work on a Humvee. When I told him my plan, his face went pale. "You want me to back you up, in front of the whole guest list?" he asked. "That's right," I said. "After the slideshow starts. If you're willing, I want you to confirm what she tried with you. Doesn't have to be long, just the truth." He swallowed hard, then squared his shoulders. "She's been walking around like she's untouchable. If you're dropping the hammer, I'm not standing on the sidelines." The rest of the day was pure logistics. I had to keep my movements normal so neither Victor nor Elise suspected anything. That meant sitting through the final rehearsal at the chapel, shaking hands with relatives, and pretending to care about the color of the chair sashes. When Elise asked me that afternoon if I was nervous, I gave her a smile that must have looked convincing. "Nervous? Oh, ready?" "Absolutely." Inside, I was running through the sequence over and over. Ceremony proceeds as scheduled. We walk into the officers' club to applause. Dinner, toasts, laughter, the usual pageantry. Best man's speech. Lights dim, slideshow begins. First 2 minutes are harmless. Engagement photos, training shots, even a few old family pictures. Without warning, the transition slides in, the messages, the bed photos, the call logs. No sound except the whispers and gasps. My mic goes live. It would be impossible to stop in time. The files were locked into the presentation loop, set to autoplay. The only way to kill it would be to physically cut power to the system, and Arden would be standing over the controls. That night, I went to bed in the VOQ with the same calm I'd had before jumping into a combat drop. There's a particular stillness that comes before you walk into a fight you know you can win. The confidence of having the high ground. They thought tomorrow would be my wedding day. They thought they'd succeeded in pulling off the perfect betrayal under my nose. But tomorrow, in front of everyone they wanted to impress, I was going to strip their illusions to the bone. And unlike the fights I'd had overseas, there would be no prisoners. The morning of the wedding broke clear and sharp, the kind of late summer Carolina day where the humidity hasn't had time to roll in yet and the sunlight makes the brass on a dress uniform look like fire. I woke before reveille. Not because I was eager for the day, but because my body was wired the way it always was before an operation. My mind was calm, my heartbeat steady, my movements precise. Today wasn't about saying vows. Today was about pulling a trigger I'd been loading all night. The base chapel was dressed to perfection. White and gold bunting lined the pews. The honor guard stood in formation at the entrance, sabers gleaming in the morning light. A string quartet played in the corner, the soft notes echoing off the old wooden beams overhead. Every seat was filled. I scanned the faces as I entered from the side. Commanders in their Class A uniforms, NCOs I'd served with on deployments, family from both sides. My mother, Margaret, sat in the front pew, looking proud, oblivious to the storm about to break. 2 rows behind her sat Captain Arden Cole, perfectly composed, her eyes meeting mine just long enough for me to know she was ready. Across the aisle, Lieutenant Mason Hartley was in his seat, jaw tight, gaze fixed forward. And then there was my father, Colonel Victor Briggs. His dress blues were immaculate, his silver eagles catching the light. He had that same half-smile he wore when inspecting troops, detached, unreadable. Except I knew now it was a mask. The music shifted. The doors opened. Elise walked in, arm hooked through her maid of honors. The gown was designer white, all flowing silk and delicate lace, the kind of thing meant to photograph well for years to come. She smiled as if she was stepping into the life she always wanted. And maybe she thought she was. Her eyes met mine at the altar. To anyone else they might have looked like the eyes of a woman in love. To me they were just another layer of the lie. The ceremony began. The chaplain read from Corinthians about love and trust, and I almost laughed at the irony. We went through the motions, readings, hymns, the exchange of rings. I slid the gold band onto her finger without hesitation, because hesitation is something an enemy can see. My father's eyes were on me the whole time. I caught him smirking once when the chaplain spoke about honor in marriage. If he thought I was going to stand here and play the fool, he was in for the rudest awakening of his life. The chaplain came to the moment. If anyone can show just cause why these two should not be joined together in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Silence. Of course. I wasn't going to detonate here, not yet. This was the loading chamber. The real blast would happen where the shrapnel could hit the most people. We said the words. The chaplain pronounced us husband and wife. We turned toward the doors as the honor guard raised their sabers, forming the arch for us to pass through. The sun hit my face as we stepped outside, applause following us down the steps. I caught sight of Arden breaking from the crowd to head for the reception hall. Mason followed a moment later, moving with the purpose of a man about to keep a promise. Elise squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she asked under her breath. I smiled. "Better than you can imagine." At the officers' club, the tables were set with military precision, white linens, polished silver, centerpieces with miniature flags. The AV booth was in the back, already manned by a soldier from Arden's intel section. She gave me the briefest nod when I entered. Guests mingled, drinks in hand, oblivious. My mother was introducing Elise to a retired brigadier general. My father was laughing with another colonel. Everything looked like a picture-perfect post-ceremony reception. But in less than an hour, the walls of their world would start to crumble. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even eager. I was just ready, the way you're ready when you've set the claymores, checked the det cord twice, and know that all that's left is to step back and push the button. Next came dinner. The toast. And then, the lights would dim. And that's when I'd let everyone see exactly who Captain Elise Warren and Colonel Victor Briggs really were. Dinner was the usual post-ceremony circus. Polished silver clinking against china, polite laughter, and the low hum of high-ranking officers talking about everything but the war stories they actually wanted to tell. Elise played the perfect bride, smiling, leaning into her guests, touching my arm like we were still in the honeymoon phase we hadn't even reached yet. My father kept the same expression he'd worn at the chapel, a quiet pride that anyone else would have mistaken for sincerity. They were both good actors. Unfortunately for them, I was the director now. The best man's toast came first. Sergeant First Class Daniel Price stood, raised his glass, and cracked a joke about me being the only man in the army who could do a 20-mile ruck march and still show up for a formal dinner without a wrinkle in his uniform. The crowd laughed, applauded, and clinked glasses. Elise beamed like this was her fairy tale. Then the lights dimmed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel said, "we've got a little something for you, a slideshow of the happy couple's journey together. Enjoy." I glanced at Arden standing near the AV booth. She gave the smallest nod. The first images rolled. The opening was harmless. Photos from training exercises, shots of Elise and me at base events, a few candid laughs at the officers' club. Guests smiled, pointing at the screen. Then, without transition, the tone changed. A text message appeared in bold white on a black background. "Last night was unforgettable, Victor. I'll replay your hands on me for weeks. Our secret always." Gasps rippled through the room. The next slide was the photo. Elise in bed at the VOQ, bare shoulders, her hand draped across my father's chest. His smirk unmistakable. Another message. Can't wait for our next night together. You're incredible. The room fell silent except for the hum of the projector. People turned in their chairs to stare, first at Elise, then at my father, then back at me. Elise's smile vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed stare like she'd been caught in a sniper's scope. "Ronan," she started, but I raised my hand, silencing her. The slideshow kept rolling. Call logs. More photos. The timestamps stamped across each one like a court exhibit. There was no mistaking the dates, one just 36 hours before the ceremony. My mother's hand shot to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. A colonel at the next table muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. My father's face went red, but he stayed seated, jaw tight. I stood, took the microphone from Daniel, and let the silence stretch. "For those of you who don't know," I said, my voice steady, "I believe in loyalty. In the field, at home, in every part of life. Today I was supposed to marry someone who shared those values." I turned to Elise. "Instead, I married the kind of person who sleeps with my father less than 2 days before the wedding." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Elise shook her head. "It's not." "Don't," I cut in. "Every one of these fine people has seen the proof. Denial just makes it uglier." I turned to my father. "And you? My role model. The man I measured myself against. You didn't just betray me, you disrespected my mother, this uniform, and every lesson you ever taught me about honor." Before they could respond, Mason Hartley stood up from his table. His voice was clear, carrying over the stunned room. "And while we're all being honest," he said, looking straight at Elise, 2 weeks ago, you invited me out under the pretense of career advice and tried to get me into your bed. I told you no. I didn't say anything before because I thought Ronan was happy. Clearly you had other priorities." The room erupted, murmurs, a few sharp intakes of breath, heads swiveling between Elise and Mason. Elise's face crumpled. "You're lying?" "No," Mason said, "you just didn't think I'd speak up." I let the noise build before speaking again. "This marriage is over. Effective immediately. As far as I'm concerned, both of you are dismissed, from my life and from any claim to my respect." I placed the mic back on the stand, straightened my jacket, and walked out. Behind me, the room dissolved into chaos. Arden was already at the door, holding it open for me. As I passed, she said quietly, "Direct hit." And she was right. But we weren't done yet, because the fallout was only beginning. By the time I stepped outside the officers' club, the late afternoon sun was still sharp enough to sting the eyes. But it felt cooler out there than inside, where the air had gone thick with whispers and the rustle of chairs scraping back from tables. I could still hear Elise's voice, high and desperate, trying to talk over the crowd. My father's baritone cutting in, telling people to mind their own business. Neither one of them realized that once the truth is in the open, it stops belonging to you. The first official fallout came the very next morning. The base commander, Major General Whitaker, called me into his office. I walked in expecting the usual sterile calm. Instead, he looked like a man who'd been dragged into a dumpster fire he hadn't asked for. "I've seen the footage," he said, sliding a laptop toward me. The slideshow had already made the rounds. Half the officers in our division had it saved to their personal drives. Colonel Briggs is being relieved of duty pending investigation under UCMJ for conduct unbecoming and fraternization. Captain Warren is being pulled from her logistics command effective immediately. I kept my face blank. "Understood, sir." Whitaker leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Sergeant Major, I don't hand out praise for personal vendettas, but you executed that with precision. Still," he paused like he was choosing his words, "this kind of spectacle? It doesn't vanish. People will remember it for a long time." "Good," I said. By the end of the week, my father had submitted his retirement papers. Not the kind with a big send-off and a shadow box of medals. The quiet kind, where your name gets read in the personnel bulletin without ceremony. Elise was placed on administrative leave while the investigation ran its course. Rumor had it she'd been offered a transfer to a remote supply depot in Alaska to get her off the radar. I don't know if she accepted. I didn't care. My mother, Margaret, filed for divorce 2 days after the reception. No drawn-out drama, no attempt at reconciliation. I could forgive a private affair, she told me over coffee, but not this. Not with you. The social fallout was even harsher. On base, people didn't whisper as much as they stared. Some were sympathetic, some just hungry for the details. A few officers who'd once fawned over my father avoided him entirely, not wanting the association. Elise's so-called friends evaporated overnight. One afternoon I caught Mason outside the commissary. "You did good in there," I told him. He shook his head. "I just told the truth. But I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Maybe it could have saved you." I cut him off. "Mason, if you'd told me, I would have confronted her privately. That wasn't enough for what they did. This way they got exactly what they deserved. No more, no less." Arden came to see me the night before she shipped out for a short intel rotation overseas. She knocked once, then stepped into my quarters like she'd done it 100 times before. "You got what you came for," she said, leaning against the wall. "I got the truth out," I replied. "That's not always the same thing." She studied me, her expression softer than I'd seen it in years. When I saw that slideshow start, I thought, there's the man I remember. The one who never hesitated to make a hard call. I almost smiled. "And here I thought you remembered the guy who couldn't keep up with you in Germany." Her mouth curved. "You almost did. And that's saying something." She stepped forward, close enough for me to smell the faint trace of her shampoo, the same one from years ago. "Take care of yourself, Ronan. And don't let this make you harder than you already are." We didn't hug. We didn't kiss. We just stood there for a moment, two people who'd shared something real once, and then she left. The official UCMJ findings came down a month later. My father was formally reprimanded and lost his retirement honors. Elise was demoted, stripped of her command, and reassigned to a dead-end post stateside. They didn't last. Whatever they thought they had between them evaporated under the weight of disgrace. Last I heard, they didn't even speak anymore. Meh. I stayed in my role long enough to train my replacement, then put in for a transfer. Not to run away, but to start fresh, somewhere their shadows couldn't follow. The story traveled farther than I expected. Soldiers I'd never met would nod at me in the PX. Strangers from other bases sent me messages about standing my ground. And every now and then I'd catch someone mutter, "That's the guy who smoked his own father and fiancé in one shot." They said it with respect. And in the military, that's a currency that spends anywhere. 2 months after the wedding, that wasn't, my transfer orders came through. New posting, new unit, new AO. Clean slate. I'd spent the weeks in between tying up loose ends, training my replacement, cleaning out my office, and making sure the men I'd shaped into soldiers were ready to stand without me. There's a certain satisfaction in walking away knowing you've left a team sharper than you found it. The morning I left, Fort Bragg looked exactly the same as it had the day I arrived years ago. Mist curling low over the PT field, the sound of boots hitting pavement as some poor platoon got smoked by their sergeant, the smell of burnt coffee wafting from the DFAC. But for me the air was lighter. I'd done what needed to be done, and now it was time to go. I had 2 duffels in the back of my truck and my orders in the glove compartment. That's all I needed. Before I cleared post, I stopped at the motor pool. Arden was leaning against a Humvee, arms crossed, like she'd been waiting for me. She'd come back from her rotation a few days earlier, and this was the first time we'd seen each other since. "Word is you're finally leaving," she said. "That's the plan." "You'll be missed," she said, and I could tell she meant it. Not the empty, "we'll miss you" you hear at going away ceremonies, but the kind of acknowledgement that comes from someone who's been in the fight with you. We stood there in the cool morning air, no small talk, no filler. I thought about what to say, something about Germany, about what we'd had, about what could have been. But I let it go. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood. "You ever need someone to watch your 6 again?" she said. "You know how to find me." I gave her a nod. "And if you ever need someone to kick the door in first, same deal." She smiled, faint but real, then turned and walked away without looking back. That was Arden. Always forward. On my way off base, I passed the officers' club. The windows gleamed in the morning sun, the same way they had the day I dropped the hammer on Elise and Victor. I wondered if they'd even set foot in there again. I'd heard through the grapevine that my father had moved to a small town a few hours away. No command, no ceremony, no one calling him sir anymore. Elise had been reassigned to an administrative role in some backwater stateside unit. From what I was told, they weren't together. Whatever they'd had couldn't survive outside the secrecy that had made it exciting. Let them sit in the quiet and think about the day they both got stripped bare in front of everyone who mattered to them. My last stop before the gate was my mother's house. Margaret had been solid through the whole thing, even when she was hurting. She'd signed the divorce papers without hesitation and started living her life on her own terms again. "I still don't understand how he could do that to his own son," she said as she handed me a thermos of coffee for the road. "Because people show their real selves when they think no one's watching," I told her. Sometimes they forget that I always am. She hugged me tight the way she used to before deployments. Go make somewhere else better, Ronan. You're good at that. I rolled out through the main gate just after 0900. The guard checked my ID, handed it back, and wished me luck. Driving away, I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending a chapter that could have rotted me from the inside if I'd let it. I'd taken the shot because it needed to be taken. I'd walked away because staying would have kept me in the blast radius. There's a saying in the field, leave no man behind. But there's an unspoken part of that, you don't drag dead weight with you either. And Elise Warren and Colonel Victor Briggs? They were dead weight. As the base shrank in my rearview mirror, I realized I wasn't just leaving them behind. I was leaving behind the version of me that thought loyalty was something everyone valued. From now on, I'd measure trust the way I measured threats, carefully, from a distance, and always with an exit plan. I didn't know exactly what was waiting for me at the new post, but I knew one thing for certain. If betrayal ever came for me again, it wouldn't walk away breathing. People always ask what the hardest part of betrayal is. Most think it's the moment you find out, that sharp, gut-punch shock when the truth lands. They're wrong. The real pain comes in the hours after, when you're alone and it's quiet, and you realize that the history you thought you had with someone was just a version of the story they let you believe. That's what guts you. For me, it wasn't just Elise. It wasn't just my father. It was the fact that they'd done it knowing exactly who I was, what I stood for, and still believed I wouldn't see it coming. They thought I'd swallow the lie, walk down the aisle, and live the rest of my life with that truth sitting like a live round in my gut. They didn't understand that I come from a world where you confront threats before they can pull the trigger. I've been asked if I regret doing it publicly, making them answer to the entire room instead of handling it in private. The answer's simple, no. Some betrayals are too big to keep behind closed doors. Some people need to be shown, in no uncertain terms, what happens when you cross the wrong man. That day at the officers' club wasn't about revenge for the sake of ego. It was about reclaiming my ground. About making sure they never got to tell the story their way. The fallout hit them harder than anything I could have done with my fists. Careers ended. Reputations shredded. Friendships gone. Every room they walked into after that, someone already knew. That's a life sentence in the military community. Meh. I came out clean. A little harder around the edges, maybe, but still standing. Still in uniform. Still doing my job. I think about Arden sometimes, not in the what-if way, but in the way you think about someone who reminds you there's still good out there. She didn't swoop in to save me. She just had my back when I needed it. That's rare. I think about Mason too, how he stood up in that room when he didn't have to. It cost him nothing, but it gave me one more hammer to drive the point home. And my mother, she walked away from a 35-year marriage without flinching. That kind of strength doesn't come from rank or medals. That's just who she is. At the end of the day, I don't tell this story to dwell on it. I tell it because it's a reminder. Loyalty isn't given. It's proven every day in small choices. And the moment someone stops proving it, they stop earning a place in your life. So I moved on. New post. New men to train. A horizon that doesn't have their shadows on it. And if I've learned anything worth passing on, it's this. You can't always stop betrayal, but you can damn sure decide how the story ends. For me, it ended with them exposed, me intact, and my life moving forward without them. And that's a win in any book.